Started. Thank you all for joining this first course that I'm doing. Just to give you a little bit of introduction of who I am. My name is Puneet, and I have been on this path of spirituality for a while now. It's been about 6 years. And just like a lot of you on this call, I started out my journey meditating by myself, at home, without really any guidance or anything. And then I got exposed to Vipassana thanks to my friend Devi, who's on this call here. And I did a few Vipassana courses, and that happened for like a couple of years. I was like into Vipassana, doing like Vipassana courses, going to the centers and doing a couple of courses. And then finally, the transformation happened when I met my teacher, which was about 3 years ago. And I've been with him for 3 years. I've been studying quite a lot. He is a disciple of Swami Chinmayananda. Basically, the book that I recommended you all to buy, the commentary that was written on that book was by his teacher. And he is a very famous person in India. I didn't know about him. Like, I moved to America and I found out who he was. Incidentally, I realized that there's a road in Bangalore where I grew up called CMH Road, and it's named after his teacher. So pretty crazy. My teacher's name is Jim Gilman, and he lives very close to me right now, about a mile away. And all that I know is thanks to him. So I think, having a teacher has really sort of changed the way I understood what spirituality is, what self-realization is, and what the journey is all about. And just like any other field of endeavor, having a teacher who can sort of walk you through what it is, answer your questions, tell you if you're doing something stupid or not, is very helpful. I hope that I can provide some help and guidance and support as needed. One thing I do want to say is that I may not have all the answers to your questions, but whatever I know is thanks to my teacher. And so if I do well, it's because of him. And if I don't do well, it's also because of him. So let's start. So what are we going to learn from this class? So some of you I know have not had any sort of prior experience meditating. So firstly, you will get some understanding of what it means to meditate, why you would want to do something like that. You will try to look at your mind in a way that you haven't before. You're going to get some tools to look at your mind, see what's happening, and get a good understanding of the psychological process of the mind. This is how I kind of like to describe it. You're seeing your mind from a distance, like from a third person. And the idea is to develop a sense of relationship with your own mind. It's like you're becoming friends with your mind, and you're seeing that your mind is just a tool, and you give your mind power, and you can take power away from your mind as well. So that's something that you will learn. Some class etiquette as well. So I would really recommend folks to switch off their phones, just because we get notifications all the time, and it's a very big distraction to keep looking at our phones. Also, if possible, keep your mics muted. But I would highly encourage folks to ask questions, because that's the style of this tradition. And we'll dig into that a little bit. So ask questions. No question is a stupid question. I encourage any question, even if it's the question that's been asked before. So please keep asking questions, because if you don't understand something and don't voice it, you are losing out. And I think other people in the class would also possibly have the same question. So if you ask a question, you're actually helping somebody else as well. So please ask questions. And the last thing is, if you have experience from any of this work, be open and have a beginner's mind. I don't know if anyone's read that book, Beginner's Mind, but essentially, have an open mind. There's going to be some ideas which are very radical and which will not make any sense, but don't have an opinion before it's a valid experience for you. So I would recommend just having a mind of not knowing, or a mind of unknowing, just I don't know. So that opens up possibilities for you. But if you come with opinions, then you are going to close yourself to possibilities. So keep your mind open, and things will work better. So the next thing I want to talk about is what is the goal of this work? So maybe this is a question I can ask any of you here. What do you think is the goal of spirituality? Anybody?
To sort of realize the self in a way. Like we are always understanding ourselves based on situations we are in. But let's say there's no concept of a situation, then what are you? I feel that is sort of.
Sure. So I think you're right. The goal of of spirituality is self-realization. And then the question is, what is self-realization, right? And there's a lot of different answers depending on who you ask. And there's a lot of different cultures sort of have different names for it. So it can get very confusing. It's like so much information and there's so many people and you talk to everyone and they all give you a different answer. I'm also probably going to give you a different answer. So, but the answer is that the goal is, yes, to be self-realized, which is interesting that self-realization is sort of a verb, right? So there's something that's happening. So it's like, some countries call it realization. Some people call it liberation. In India, we call it samadhi or nirvana. So something is happening. There's an event that occurs. And from that point onwards, something is different, right? So self-realization is, from my understanding, is your sense of identity explodes. Right now, you think you are a person, you think you're limited to this human body, you have certain ideas about yourself, you have a personality, you think you are, a man or a woman, or maybe neither. You have a job, you have some interests. So that's our sense of identity. And from that standpoint, that's how we experience this world. When self-realization occurs, the sense of boundaries completely dissolves, which is you do not consider yourself to be a limited person anymore. That's a little woo-woo, but basically that's what it is. Your sense of boundaries are gone, which is why you're okay with anything. You accept life on life terms, as my teacher would say. So we're going to learn how to get there. And interestingly enough, I think everybody is on the path to self-realization, consciously or unconsciously, because everyone is seeking and doing things that they think will give them happiness. That's usually our motivations to do anything, because you think that there's something at the end of whatever you're doing that's going to make you happier. The question is, what is it that really will give us happiness? And what is it that will settle us for good? Where once you get it, you're done. There's no sort of obsessive or compulsive need to want to do things anymore. You're doing things out of inspiration. You're doing things out of love and expression. So how do you get to a place where you do things from that standpoint rather than from a compulsive standpoint? So that's I think the final goal. So like I mentioned, we're consciously going to start our journey towards self-realization. Before, you may have been unconscious about it. Now you're going to be conscious about it. And there's nothing to be scary about. Everything's going to be way better. there's a lot of fear of like, oh my God, am I going to change? Am I going to lose my identity? No, it's going to get better. Trust me. All right. So one thing that my teacher does say is, a salesperson always puts the customer in touch with the benefits of the product. So that's what I'm trying to do here is, give you a taste of why this work is actually useful and what you're going to get and how your life is going to be really transformed. Imagine if you are in a situation where you're just content with whatever is. Like right now, there's coronavirus going on, there's people losing jobs, there's all kinds of craziness, but that's the world, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen. So if we can be in a situation where everything is okay, because that creation and destruction and change is just part of life. So if you truly believe that from not just from an intellectual standpoint, but from a direct experiential standpoint, and that becomes part of who you are, your experience of life is going to be so much richer and more blissful. Cool. So that was a bit of my sales pitch. What we're going to do is we're going to look at self-realization from Advaita Vedanta's standpoint. So Advaita Vedanta is an ancient tradition. It's been around for, I don't even know, maybe some people say 5,000 years, some people say 6,000 years. And the reason why it's that old is because it was an oral tradition to begin with. It was there even before writing was invented. So it was orally transmitted for many years. And then at some point writing started and then people were like, all right, maybe it's better to write this down. But that's why the tradition has so much of like the chanting and the remembering, because it was an oral tradition. And that sort of tradition has been still transmitted. I mean, it's still kept in the same form. It's just that now we also have books. But if you really study it from a traditional standpoint, you will see that you'll have to like memorize all of the verses and people are chanting. It looks very mechanical from the outside, but it's actually, there's a lot of reasons why it's done in that way. But now, thanks to books and the internet, we have all these ways of learning it, and you don't have to memorize the verses. I'm not going to give you that homework if you're thinking about it. Cool. So that's so Advaita Vedanta essentially translates to Advaita, which means non-dual, which is a very interesting term. I'm not going to go too much into it. I will in the future, but Vedanta is a very is a word that I want to talk about. So Vedanta literally means Veda and Anta. So Vedas are these old scriptures from India, which are, I think there are 4 of them. And they essentially talk about, everything, which is like how to do business, how to marry, how to run a family. I don't know. Basically anything you have to do if you're a human being, right? But the end of the Vedas contain these philosophical texts, and they're called the Upanishads. And so that's what Vedanta literally means. It's the end of the Vedas, and they're specifically referring to these Upanishads. And what are these Upanishads? It's a good question. So Upanishads translate to sit down near. And that's interesting because it's like, does that literally mean sit down near? Yes, it does, because what's happening is you are meeting a teacher and so if you can think of like 5,000 years ago, there weren't really any chairs or anything. So you sit down on the floor near the teacher, and the teacher usually sits like on a platform and is transmitting this knowledge. And it's interesting, why should a teacher sit above you, below you? It's like, does that mean that they're better than you somehow? Not really. It's mostly, if a teacher is slightly above students, you can kind of see what's going on. If anyone's sleeping, you can kind of point them out. So that's kind of the idea, but also there's a subtler meaning to it, which is information flows from something higher to something lower, right? Like, so if you're like trying to learn something, you have to look up to the person teaching it to you. Otherwise, you're not going to be receptive to whatever they're trying to tell you. So it's also sort of this metaphorical sense, but literal sense as well. And Sanskrit is the language that is used to, write all of these Upanishads. And Sanskrit is a very interesting language because it was specifically crafted to express these philosophical ideas. Wow, there's a lot I can say about that, but maybe I don't want to dig into that. But in the Upanishads, there's two questions we're trying to answer, or maybe there's three. Who am I? How does this world come about? And what's the third one? What is the relationship between the world and me? Three questions. And I think all of spirituality in some sense tries to answer these three questions. And there's valid paths across different traditions. Advaita Vedanta is not the only path. It is one path. But they all reach to the same point. And then when you get to that point, you have to give up even the Vedanta. So you can think of, if you're trying to climb a mountain or something, you have a staff with you. You're using the staff to get to the top, but that's the only purpose, to get to the top. Once you're at the top, the staff also becomes baggage. So you're gonna have to toss the staff out. So in the end, you also have to forget the Vedanta. So, a lot of people get very sort of carried away with just the journey, and that becomes who they are, which is like, I am a Vedantist, or I am a, Buddhist, or I am, this Vipassana meditator. That becomes your identity. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to break identities. So once you use this tool, so in the end, Vedanta is just a tool. So once you use this tool to get where you need to go, you don't need the tool anymore. You don't have to carry the tool with you all the time. You can toss it away. So that's what we're going to do. Obviously, in this 8 weeks, you're not going to go from being a human to being self-realized. It's possible, but I don't know you well enough to say yes or no, but it is possible. You will at least learn the entire field of the Vedanta in these 8 weeks to give you a good sense of whether this is something you want to pursue deeper or not. And if not, you'll get some cool tools to apply in life anyways. All right, so why do we need to do the Vedanta though? Like, why? It's like, when I started doing it, I was, to give you some context, I was an atheist when I was growing up as a teenager. So I always looked at religion in a very funny way, and thought people were stupid. I was all about science, so I always sort of had this weird aversion to anything religious. And it's funny that now I'm looking at all these Sanskrit books, and they're all about God and stuff, and it's funny how the world works that way. But why do we do the Vedanta, or why do we study the scriptures? The answer to that is the scriptures are powerful. They have been studied for thousands of years, and certain words and certain ideas gain power when more and more people start to believe in it, and more people experience it. So the Vedanta itself, just reading the stuff itself can transform you. So that's why traditions are sort of kept and protected, because without that protection, things can get mutated and the original meaning can get lost. So if you have a teacher who comes in and says, I'm going to teach from my heart, right? That's like, why don't you talk from your heart? Now, the problem with that is that it'll work in this generation. But the moment the teacher dies and now there's somebody else who comes along, their heart is probably not going to be as good as the original teacher's heart, or it could completely change. So the Vedanta is sort of a system, and it's structured in a way that that has continued unchanged for thousands of years. Because why? Because it works. So think about it, like why would you keep something in the same form for thousands of years, and why would people continue to accept it? Either it's, you know, blind faith, right? Or it's something that actually works. There's only two possibilities. So I would, you know, I would not ask you to believe in either. I would say you should take a mind position of, you know, I don't know because I haven't experienced it yet. But in my experience, I can say that it does work. Um, and that's why we're going to use the Vedanta as a tool. All right, so another concept I want to talk about before we actually start our book is this idea of what it is to be subtle and what is it to be gross. These are, like, I guess, two philosophical ideas. A good real world example would be if somebody comes up to you and says, I'm hurt, right? The grossest form of that would be, you know, you're physically hurt, right? I have a physical, like I don't know, I fell down or something, right? Now, a subtler form with that would be I'm emotionally hurt, right? Somebody said somebody yelled at me. And maybe the subtlest form of that would be, you know, some idea was like, you know, I believed in, like, I don't know, what's a good idea? I believed in this mathematical theory or something, and then that's been proven wrong or something, and I'm like hurt about that, right? So that's like the subtlest form of, so there's different layers of how you could be hurt. So that's one example. Another example, you know, this is something that my teacher uses, which is ice is the grossest form of water, right? A subtler form of ice is water, liquid water, and a subtler form of liquid water is vapor. And similarly, liquid water is a grosser form of vapor, and solid ice is a grosser form of liquid water. Does that make sense, everybody? Please interrupt me if that does not. And please feel free to ask any questions if none of this is making sense. So the Vedanta is always going to talk about things, or even in any tradition, I think, is going to have, any teaching is going to be in a gross, can be applicable in the gross form and in the subtle form. And what we are trying to do is we're trying to go from the gross to the subtle, to the subtler, to the subtlest. So we're going to try to get as subtle as possible, because who you are is the subtlest of the subtlest. That's who you are. And it's impossible to experience that as an object. You cannot be able to point yourself and say, this is who I am, because you are that which is looking at this. So you can never see yourself as an object. This may not make sense, but we're going to explore what that means. Okay, so that was about the Vedanta. So now we're going to be studying this book. Everyone get a copy of this book? Who doesn't have a copy of this book? If you don't have a copy, that's totally fine. You know, this is the first class. I don't expect you to get a copy. But if you're serious about this work, I would highly recommend you to get a copy, because, you know, there is a commentary. There's Swami Chinmayananda, who is my grandfather teacher. Apparently, that's how the tradition says it. He has written stuff about things in here, and I would highly encourage you to go back after class to read the stuff that we cover, because I'm giving you my perspective and you're going to read somebody else's perspective, and it's always good to read different ways of trying to express the same ideas, so your understanding of those ideas become your own. You want to, like, assimilate these ideas and make them your own, and the more you read about different people, the easier it'll get for you. So I recommend this copy because this is been validated by my teacher, but I'm sure there are other copies as well, other commentaries which are as useful as well. Okay, so like I was saying, so Advaita Vedanta is a non-dual tradition, which means that it says that this whole world is made up of just one material. The material cause of this entire universe, including you, is one thing. That's why so then I guess the question is like, why is it called non-dual and not just oneness, right? Which is, oh, oneness, like we are all one. Or, you know, if everyone drops the acid and everyone sees we're all one, right? So why isn't it called oneness? Well, it's not called oneness because our experience is that there are two things. I am this person, and now there's this other world. So it's me and the others. So even though it appears that this world is separate and I am apart from it, actually it is not, which is why it is not two. So it's being very explicit. It's like, hey, I understand that your experience is it's two, but I'm going to tell you that it is not two. So as opposed to it saying it's oneness and not acknowledging the fact that it is actually dual. Our experience is dual, but what we're going to do is we're going to analyze that experience and we're going to see and notice that is it actually two or is it one? So that's going to be the process of investigation. Cool. That's all I had before we jump onto this book. Any questions so far?
I have a question. So does this mean that we're effectively studying the Upanishads?
Great question. Actually, I did have something to say before starting the book. I wanted to talk about this book. So what is this book? This book is called Atmabodha, which means, so Atma is the self, just something that's in you, who you are, and Bodha is knowledge. So it is the knowledge of yourself, of the self rather. And it's a book that was written, I believe, sometime in 800 CE. And this, so there is this cool dude, his name is Adi Shankara. And Adi essentially means first. And Shankara is, Shankara is like a name which is derived from like Lord Shiva. And people usually call him Shankaracharya, which means, Acharya is like a teacher. So he's a teacher who is Shankara, and he's Adi because he was the first one. So you will hear if you're, a little bit more in this work, you hear about this guy. He's kind of like the equivalent of Gautam the Buddha. He's like the first Buddha, but he was not the only Buddha. There were a lot of Buddhas who came after him. Similarly, there were a lot of Shankaracharyas who came after Adi Shankaracharya, who was the first one. Why was he famous? Because he was like a child prodigy. I think he was probably like 12 or 13 when he got self-realized. And he wrote like a bunch of books. He transformed India, went all around India, propagating for the Vedanta. So interesting thing about India at the time was religion, like there was no concept of like, Hinduism, right? Hinduism is a very Western concept. People believed in like their own sort of local gods and like local ideas. And it was a society that was constantly seeking, like most parts of India were like, completely different. Like you can see that even today. And the gods and the philosophy that they believed in was also different. But the cool thing about the spirituality there was, if you come up to me and can convince me that your idea of religion is better than mine, I will become your follower. So there used to be a lot of debates between heads of different religions or whatever. And if the person lost, then all the followers of the person who lost would now become followers of people who of the victor. So Adi Shankara was a genius. He comes in, starts debating around the entire country, and at the time, India was mostly Buddhist, and he essentially debates and wins and converts people from Buddhism back to Hinduism, and specifically back to Vedanta, because there's no such thing as Hinduism. Hinduism is how we understand it now. So that's what he did. And one of the other things he did was, he took the Upanishads and he created what are called the workbooks. I think the Sanskrit for it is Prakarana Grantha, which means a workbook. And workbooks are something that students, like his students, would read. And what they're doing is they create a process where you start from a specific point and you're moving towards another point. So just like I was talking about the subtle and the gross things, what you're doing is you're starting from a gross point and you're moving subtler and subtler to a more subtler point. So to answer your question, Ramya, yes, this Advaita Vedanta are the Upanishads, but all of this content from this book have been derived from the Upanishads. But they've just been assimilated in a way that makes it easy to consume. The Upanishads are very dense and they don't always make sense and they're paradoxical. So it's very hard for somebody to just read an Upanishad and be like, all right, I get it. So you need somebody who has walked the path or has some experience being able to unfold the Upanishads. But these books are also fairly dense. I don't know if you tried reading some of this. May have, at least when I read it the first time, I was like, what am I reading? But it will get easier, I promise. So that's what we're gonna do. Any other questions? All right. Cool. So let us turn to, okay, so I have another question. Does anyone not have a book? Because if you don't, I had like a presentation sort of thing where I took pictures of the verses and I can just project it if you don't have a book.
So I have a different
I don't have a book.
version. I think that's what me and Sanjana have.
Yeah, I mean, the book is written 800 years ago, so you're probably fine.
I don't have a book either.
Okay, so let me do the presentation thing. How do I share my screen? Oh yeah, here. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. All right. So the style of this of our study is, there's Sanskrit in here, and then there's English. So according to tradition, we are going to read the Sanskrit, and then we're going to read the English. Cool. So let us turn to. I guess I'm going to share this thing. So what page is this? 7. So if for folks who have the book, it's page 7. But we're going to read the meditation verse. Does anyone have any experience reading stuff like this? I know like people who come from like fairly pious families have had some experience. If not, I can read it. But if anyone feels inspired to read it, you can read it as well. All right, I'm gonna try. So, prapaha smarami hridi sanspurat atmatattvam satchit sukham param hansangati turiyam yata swapna jagara sushuptam vaiti nityam tad brahma nishkalam aham nacha bhuta sangaha. So the English is, in the early hours of the day, I meditate upon the essential self, clearly experienceable.
Ask him whether I can start.
Can I? So she wants to read it out.
Say it without looking.
Sure.
Hi everyone. Om pratasmarami vrudi samspuradatva tattvam Satchit Sukham Paramahamsam Tritiyam Tat Swapna Jagrita. I forgot, you are looking at all of you.
Well, that was beautiful.
I say it every morning, but I think I'm a little tense looking at all of you. Have a nice time.
All right. Thank you so much for offering. Cool. So, I'm going to read the English from the beginning again. In the early hours of the day, I meditate upon the essential self, clearly experienceable in the heart cave, that which is existence, knowledge, bliss in nature, that which is the supreme goal, the Paramahamsa state, that which is the fourth plane of consciousness, which constantly illumines all experiences in the dream, waking, and deep sleep conditions. I am that partless Brahman, not this assemblage of matter envelopments. So if you look, so this is essentially what you call as a meditation verse, and it actually contains the entire teaching of the Vedanta. So if you are like somebody who understands this, and if this is your direct experience, then I bow down to you, and you can say you don't need to be in this class. But the entirety of this book is going to go through some of these ideas in this book. So I'm not going to go too much into what this book means, but we're going to start with the first verse. But essentially, as we get further into the book, this is really a good verse to keep reading just before your meditation, to kind of give you some ideas about what to think about in your meditation. Right, so I'm seeing, can you make it full screen? All right. What happened to my presentation? Oh, you can see the presentation? For some reason, I can't see the presentation. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and try again. Sorry, just give me 1 second. All right, sorry, my bad. It was not a keynote presentation. It was a Google presentation. I was having a senior moment here. Okay. All right, so let us do the first verse. So I'm going to read this out as well. Tapo bihi shina papanam shantanam vitaraginam mumukshu namapekshoham Atmabodho vidhiyate. So I am composing this Atmabodha, the treatise on the self-knowledge, for those who have purified themselves by austerities, who are peaceful in heart, who are free from cravings and are desirous of liberation. So here, the author, who is Adi Shankara, is essentially talking about who he is composing this book for. He's saying this is a treatise on the self-knowledge. So like I was saying, this book is going to tell you how to realize yourself. In the Advaita Vedanta tradition, we have what is known as the qualifications of a fit student. There's also qualifications of a fit teacher, but there's also qualifications of a fit student. And here he's sort of not explicitly saying that, but that's what he's implying. And what are some of those qualifications? Those who have purified themselves by austerities. What does that mean? So a lot of us, have, some of us have had previous experience of meditation. Some of us do like yoga. Some of us do like chanting. Some of us go on like walks in nature. Basically, a lot of actions that you do, that you take on to kind of like purify yourself. And purification here doesn't mean some sort of like moral purification. It's not about like becoming a good person. It's more about how many thoughts are constantly roaming in your head. If the volume level of your mind is on max, you know, when you do these things, does that volume go down? Do you feel more in the now? Do you feel your mind is more at peace, or is your heart more at peace, as he says here? So that's how you want to look at purification. Advaita Vedanta is not moralistic at all. It doesn't care what you do. You could be, you know, a serial killer, but the Vedanta would still work for you, because you know, whatever you did in your past does not matter. It's all about how can you do actions in the now to transform yourself. So peaceful in the heart, which is, you know, are you content, and who are free from cravings. So this is interesting. So, you know, in the Buddhist tradition, there is this idea that, you know, cause of suffering is craving, right? So it's kind of the same sort of idea, which is, you know, most of us suffer and are constantly worried because we have this innate sense of this craving, which is some form of a desire, but it's more insistent. Like, you know, this thing has to come true. So what he's saying is that, you know, people who have freed themselves, well, that is very tough, because I don't definitely feel that way. I definitely have cravings. So you can look at this and you'll be like, oh my God, like, I don't think I'm ready for this work, because this sounds like, you know, this person is like way more ahead in the path than I am. But don't worry, like the entire process of yoga or of Vedanta is to become a fit student. Because once you become a fit student, liberation immediately comes to you. So so if you read this and you get a little scared and say, oh my God, am I not this person? Don't worry. The entire path is going to give you these qualities. And then lastly is desirous of liberation. This is kind of important because, you know, without, you know, at some level, you do have a desire to be free, which is why you're here in this class. You know, you're not, I mean, I guess we can't really go out these days, but if you're, you know, if you see your life and if you're doing things that, you know, that are making your mind quieter, and you're doing more things that will move you towards this path, then, you know, and on some level you are desirous of liberation. And this is important because without this desire, nothing can happen, right? Like if you want anything in life, you need to have that desire. So so the more you desire, the more energy you will put into it. And you will start to experience that, you know, the more that you go into this path, it's sort of a feedback loop where the more you do this stuff, the more desirous you get of liberation. So even if you don't have a very strong desire, that's totally fine. It will come over time. So that's the first verse. Let's do the second verse. Let's see how much time we have. We have maybe about 20 minutes more before we move on to the next section. All right, verse 2. Actually, before that, does anyone have any questions?
How to ask? Puneet?
Yes.
In this book, do you know which page you're reading out of?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say we were on verse 1. Did you find verse 1? It should be right in the beginning of the book.
I have the same book, Sanjana. I found the page.
Where is it?
You just go through, I mean, it's after the Roman number pages. The first few pages are like an introduction.
Okay.
And then this what he just read would be page number 1.
Okay, fine. Thanks.
Cool. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, I can't see my screen. So if you're doing anything on the chat, I will not be able to see it. So don't feel shy to
I'm
ask
not sure.
questions.
We can't see your screen anymore. So for those of us that don't have a book, you stop sharing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I thought I was sharing the screen. Okay. All right, can you see the screen now?
Yes. Ooh.
Puneet, I have a question.
Is that Devi? Yes, ask me.
So you said something about how like being desirous of things or like wanting things, like that is a cause of our suffering or anxiety or whatever you choose to call it. And you're saying when you're free of that, that's when you experience liberation. Is that an accurate understanding?
Sort of. So I would say there's a distinction between desire and there's a distinction between craving.
Right.
There's nothing wrong in desiring things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly the suffering comes from the insistence of that desire. Like you can desire to want to become, you know, president of your country. That's a fair enough desire, and you can put in effort and you can try to go down that path. But when that does not happen, do you suffer, right? So that's sort of the way we want to look at it. There's nothing wrong in desiring things, because without desire, our life, we can't do anything, right? Like I want to go and eat some food. That's a desire. I want to, like, you know, anything has a cause of desire associated to it. The distinction I want to make is the sense of, if it doesn't happen, then I will not be happy. That's the distinction. And we want to look at those kinds of desires. Like, why do we have those desires?
Okay, that makes sense. Because that was my question. Like, where is the line between a desire and a craving? But I can answer that. Okay, thank you.
Good question.
So it's like a dependency on that desire is what you're trying to liberate yourself from. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. So what you're trying to do is what you're going to see is that whatever the desire is, and let's say the desire comes true, right? How do you feel when the desire comes true? You feel happy. You know, I feel content. I feel satisfied. I feel accomplished. All of those feelings and, you know, the consequence of that desire coming true, you have that already right now. And we're going to see why we don't see it. Did that make sense? If it doesn't, we're going to come around to that idea again. But you're right. It's more about like letting go of that dependency. There's nothing wrong in desiring. There's nothing wrong in being ambitious. But, you know, it takes a lot of cooperation and energy to get something outside of you to work the way you want it to work, right? So let's say you want to do like a major project, you want to work on a major project, you need a lot of cooperation. You may need like 5 other people to work on it with you, and you need to convince them you want it to go in a certain direction. So it requires a lot of energy, and sometimes it's going to be successful and sometimes it's not. But do you feel dejected when it's not? And do you feel elated when it is? Because if you do, then you're giving that end result a lot more importance than it really does. So that's what I'm trying to drive at.
I hear you, and I'm going to put this question out there because it's something I wondered about, and I'm sure you'll get to it. Aren't the emotions associated with desire or craving, depending on where you are on that spectrum or what you're wanting or feeling, aren't they also motivators? Like this feeling of joy that you speak of, or this feeling of being dejected, like, doesn't that also push you to do or want or create? So I don't, maybe you'll get to that, but that's a tension in my mind, and I just want
yeah, we'll get to that. So there's a question of we will talk about, which is like, does creativity come from in a sense of expression, or does it come from a sense of contraction? It's like, do I want to do things because of some external dependency, or does it come from within? So, like, there's nothing wrong in being creative and being joyful and coming from that sense of expression. But does it come from some sort of an external thing of like fear, or like, I need to do it because they will think I am cool, or, like there's many ways of getting motivation, but we like to see where is the motivation where you are expressing and feeling joyful at the same time, and not sense of like, I'm fearful and there's some deadline coming up, so I must do it, so I'm very scared. So like, we will look at those things. And a very good point that you bring up.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, Puneet. I have one quick question.
Sure.
As we're reading this text, to what extent should we be really digging into the actual words themselves, kind of like a literary analysis, versus just taking it all in and maybe not getting hung up on specific concepts?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Arpan. I would say don't get hung up right now, because the Vedanta is extremely repetitive. Like, there's literally only 5 things that you really need to know. But the problem is our mind is too like, there's too many thoughts in our mind which prevent us from actually seeing from where seeing the source. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to like turn our attention to within, but our natural tendency of our mind is to look at stuff, right? So new words that come to us, new ideas that are presented to us, we try to grab at those ideas. And what we're trying to the process we're going to try to do is we're going to try to like pull our attention from something outside to something within, until we reach the point of who we are. So any of these ideas, at least in class, I would say don't get too hung up upon it, because these ideas are going to come back again. But when you go back, after this class, I would encourage you to read the commentary, think about this, and we're going to like, eventually practice some meditation at the end of this class. And there's a certain way that we're going to meditate that's going to help you try to think about these ideas. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions before we move to the next one? Okay. Cool. Let's do the next one. This is a good one. Bodho anya sadhebhyo hi sakshan mokshaika sadhanam pakasya vahni vajnanam vina moksho na siddhyati. Just as the fire is the direct cause for cooking, knowledge is the direct means of liberation. Compared to all other forms of discipline, knowledge of the self is the only direct means of liberation. So this is giving you a sense of like, what do you have to do to be liberated? So if you want to cook something, if you want to cook some food, what do you have to do? Like, you need heat, and in order to get heat, you need fire. Without fire, there would be no cooking. If you want, let's take a different example. If you want to, let's say, cut a vegetable, right? Without a sharp knife and you using that knife and slicing it, there would be no cut vegetable. So there are direct causes for a certain outcome, right? So the cause for food being cooked is fire. And similarly, the cause for a vegetable being cut is a knife, which is sharp, and you doing the action of cutting the knife, cutting the vegetable. So does this mean that so in the analogy of the Vedanta, the cause of liberation is knowledge, because right now our problem is ignorance. Ignorance of what? Ignorance of who we are. So the process that we're going through is we are going to see who we are. Right now we believe that we are these ideas, and we have the sense of identity, right? We say we are, human. We have this, we have a job. We like these things. So we have built this identity, and we're going to see that that's just a bunch of things that come up. That's not really who we are. It doesn't mean that you don't have those qualities. Those qualities are a part of you. But just like you don't say, I am a car, I mean, just because I have a car, it doesn't mean you are a car. Similarly, you will start to notice that just because you have certain ideas, it doesn't make you who you are. It's certainly a part of you, but that's not who you are. And the direct cause of how you realize that is knowledge of that idea. And we're going to give you certain ideas that will break down other ideas. So it's sort of like, we are trying to light a fire with a stick, which is also wooden, which can also eventually burn. But we use one stick to light other sticks on fire. I don't know if you've ever gone camping and you're trying to light some firewood. You usually have another stick, which is also made of wood, that you use to stoke the fire and like move things around. But eventually, once the fire lights, you can throw this stick as well. And then you're done, right? So that's kind of what we're going to use here. We're going to give you certain ideas to destroy other ideas and to burn other ideas in your mind. And once all those ideas are burned, you're going to take this idea and also toss it in the fire, and even that gets burned. So that's sort of the process that we're going to go through. And the reason why it says the direct means is because without actually looking at yourself clearly, without any impurities, and impurities here doesn't mean like from a moral standpoint, without your mind being clouded. So what here is impure? It is your mind. Your mind is impure, and in the sense it is full of thoughts, and it doesn't have time to what's the word? The attention of your mind is always on these thoughts, and you don't have any gap between thoughts. And what we're trying to do is we're going to try to create gaps between your thinking. And in those gaps, you're going to have points where you will be able to see who you are in its glory. And that's who you are. The gaps is where we're going to focus our attention to, and not on the thoughts, because the thoughts are just ideas which you have absorbed by being on this planet, but that's not who you are. Who you are is in the silence between the thoughts. And the only way you can notice that is by direct means of knowledge, which is like looking at it. And once you see it for what it is, that's when you have a direct knowledge. Right now, I'm giving you an indirect knowledge, which is I'm telling you about it. But unless you do it within your own self, it's only going to remain another idea for you. So the way we study the Vedanta is, we get certain ideas and we apply them in our own direct experience and see that if it is true or not. And if it's not true, that's fine. You can keep it on the shelf and you can talk about what happened. But we don't want to like just use it as like another idea that I now know, and I'm going to talk about this over dinner with somebody, right? It's mostly applicable. It's only useful when you apply it in your own meditation and see that, is this idea really true for me? So that's the process and the style of this work. So does that mean that all the other things that I do are useless? Like, going for a walk or like meditating or, yoga or chanting, are they all useless? No, they're not. They are basically preparatory things that you do to develop a mind that is subtle enough to be able to notice those gaps. So right now, the problem is that our mind is just too noisy. And it's too noisy because we have fed it and we have made the mind the king in our world. But actually, you are the king, not the mind. You have power over the mind and not the other way around. So these preparatory practices like, chanting and yoga and like meditation, they all train the mind and give you more control, so that when you are sitting in meditation and you're doing this sort of self-inquiry, as we will learn in the course of this book, you will be able to see the self clearly. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about that? The unfortunate thing about this presentation is that I can't see your faces, and I would love to. I just feel like I'm talking to the abyss right now. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I would move on to the next one. All right, let's maybe do one more verse before, it's 9 o'clock here. So let's do one more verse before we do our first meditation.
Sorry, Puneet, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So in the previous verse 2, where you speak about knowledge being the only path to liberation, so is there only a particular way in which you can attain this knowledge? Because you had mentioned earlier that there are different paths to attain knowledge, and therefore there should be multiple paths to liberation.
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's so the way I like to think about it is like, we are all trying to climb this hill, right? And on the hill, there's a temple. And the temple has one door, right? And that door there's only one door. There's only one way to enter it. But there's multiple paths that you can take to get to the top. So all these different paths, including the Vedanta, offer tools to climb to the temple. I mean, to climb the mountain, to get to the door of the temple. But finally, you have to see who you are, which is what this one is describing, which is knowledge, direct knowledge. Because unless you have direct knowledge of who you are, it's just another idea that you're going to talk about, and that's not going to be your, the way I like to think about it. Like, indirect knowledge will fail you in a crisis. When things are working very well, it's like, oh yeah, I'm chill, I'm doing, nothing affects me. But in a crisis, if you do not have direct knowledge, you will be as, you will suffer as much as just another person. So all paths in the end do lead to this door. And even in those paths, once you get there, this is what they all prescribe. So this is the final practice. So if you've, I know, is this Niladri, right? So you told me that you did like, Vipassana meditation. So even in Vipassana, we're basically, doing, there's a process, but there's a final, I haven't done these advanced courses to know much about what they finally prescribe, but I am 100% sure there would be a final finishing touch, which is you have to look at who you are. Does that make sense, Niladri?
Yeah. Thank you.
So has anyone any experience in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which are like the eightfold path? So even there's like, it's a process. You start with the do's and don'ts. It's a very sort of morally, make your life pure from like a physical standpoint, eat the right food, and then you start doing like, I don't know, like yoga, like physical exercise, so you're physically fit. Then you start doing a little like concentration exercises, so your mind is getting a little focused, and then you do like sense withdrawal, so you're trying to withdraw your attention from the outside world, and also from within your internal thoughts. And then finally you get into like, I guess like actual meditation, where you're like only focused on like one point or something. And then finally, what do they say? That is samadhi. And that is when liberation occurs. And samadhi there is exactly what this is talking about, which is knowledge dawns on you at that point. So like different paths like all have a different sort of language to describe these things, but I think they are all talking about the same thing. It's just more about like what appeals to you and yeah, whether it works for you. But really good question.
I actually have another question.
Mm-hmm.
So is the goal actually to widen the gap until the mind becomes entirely blank?
That's a very good question. Yes and no. The mind, the mind has a deep-rooted ignorance, which means that it has a firm belief on something that it is not. And this has been created over lifetimes. From this tradition and multiple traditions, you don't have to believe in rebirth, but this is a very, very deep-rooted belief. And in order for that belief to be uprooted, a deep experience has to occur to the mind. Some people, it's not necessary to go, blank for like hours. There's some books which say you only need a blank mind for about 7 seconds. And it's not so much as a blank mind, it's more so much as like your mind has just lost interest in this garbage that it throws up, that those thoughts sort of automatically dissipate. And your attention is just on itself. And that's what, samadhi, or how different traditions describe it in different ways. But that's what the process is. But in the end, the mind comes back, right? So it's not that the mind is the problem. It's more like our understanding of the mind is the problem. So unless you firmly believe from an experiential standpoint that you are not your mind, then you're free. My teacher says that liberation occurs only to the mind. The cause of bondage is your firm belief that you are the mind. And the cause of liberation is the firm conviction that you are not the mind. So if you have a firm conviction that you're not the mind, you are liberated. If you believe that you are the mind, you are bound, because then you are going to be bound by whatever the mind throws up, and you're going to believe in that story. So that's it. I don't know if that helps answer the question. It depends from person to person. So some people need a lot of work. So for example, there's a lot of saints and sages across the world who have had some like spontaneous liberation or realizations when they were teenagers. How did that happen? Maybe they did a lot of work in their previous lives and now they just had to do a little bit of work and they were done. So it just depends. We don't know how much accumulated stuff that we have, but this work is going to bring, we're going to start to see our own self. So, so this is something I wanted to talk about too. So in the way I like to think about religion, true religion is how, Swami Vivekananda puts it, which is from the time that we are born, we are constantly looking outwards, right? We are thinking about things outside of us. I want this, I want that. And you try to do them, right? Like you try to get it, you try to like satisfy some desires, you try to be a little accomplished in life. You get relationships, you get friends, you do all of those things. But finally, there comes a time in your life when you realize that, the spiraling of my vision externally has not quite given me what I'm really looking for. And there comes a time when you start to see, okay, maybe there's something with like all of my experience comes from within, and the way I feel, the way I experience this world, all comes from within. So maybe I need to change something within that will change everything outside. So that is the beginning of religion, where your attention starts to go from, being the spiral expanding infinitely outwards to it starts now going in the other direction, and you start to, close in. So all of this spiritual path that you're doing is you're trying to reduce that spiral into a point. And then once you know who you are, then the spiral can explode again, because at that point, you're not doing things out of compulsion anymore. You're doing them out of a sense of expression. So that's kind of how I like to think about it. Another thought that's coming up in my mind was the first sutra in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Has anyone read the Patanjali Yoga Sutras?
Bits and pieces, not in any completion.
Okay, I haven't either, but I just remember the first one, which is like really cool. So the first sutra is literally translates to, and now yoga, which basically means, you've tried a bunch of shit in this world. I tried to go to Pilates, I tried to go do some, what is it, Barry's boot camp classes, all of those things I tried, didn't quite work. I'm physically fit, but that doesn't really, I'm still not satisfied, right? So you've sort of done things in life. I've traveled, I've gone to all these countries, I've gone on these like cruises, I've done those things, but there's still this emptiness that I'm unable to fill. And once you come to that place, and now yoga. So, yoga is what is going to give it to you. And I didn't go into this, but yoga is literally, okay, let me ask somebody on this group. So who can tell me what yoga means?
Like a union, yog, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's the joining of things.
Absolutely. So the English word yoke comes from yoga. Sorry, what are you doing? So the English word yoke comes from yoga. What are we joining? Because, to join, there has to be one thing and the other thing. So in our study, we basically are joining the mind to the infinite. And the infinite is who you are. And the mind is, our limited sense of identity, our ego. And that is getting yoked to the infinite. And what happens when you add anything to the infinite? It remains unchanged, right? The infinite becomes infinite. So infinite plus anything is still infinite. So essentially what that subtler meaning of that is that your mind dissolves, and your mind is no longer a mind anymore. So that is the process. And Advaita Vedanta essentially is also yoga. May not have heard that, but what we are practicing is one of the paths of yoga. The path is called Jnana Yoga, which literally means the path of knowledge. And there's 4 kinds of yoga. I don't want to go too much into this because this is, I can keep talking about this, but we are basically doing yoga as well. The process is joining the mind to the infinite. And the way we do that is through direct insight, through seeing, and through direct experience. All right, I think it's 9:15, and I did not want to, I wanted to do a meditation before we end this, so I don't think we can do the next verse today. All right, so but any final questions before we do a meditation? I'm gonna stop sharing.
Hey, Puneet, just a clarification.
Yeah.
So in this, the concept of liberation, is it what you would also call as ego death or something like that? Are they similar experiences, or is it just like one is temporary and one is more permanent or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, different traditions call it different things. Yeah, ego death is fair, but you hear a lot of ego death when people are doing psychedelics. And I would always be wary about, those experiences when you're high on drugs, because those are temporary and they occur when your mind is in a different state. So when you come back to normal, you are still there with your misunderstandings, and your mind is back, right? You were on a different, you were dreaming a great dream on the psychedelics, but now you're back onto your normal reality, and your normal mind is back, and it's very hard to assimilate those concepts. I don't know if that was what you were referring to, but yes, in theory, ego death is what occurs. But true ego death, it's not even ego death, it's mind death which occurs. And your mind is essentially burnt up, and from that a new mind comes, which is a lot more beautiful and a lot more different.
Thanks.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. There's a couple of messages in the chat. Okay. Cool. So let us do a meditation. And how many of you have meditated before? Or actually, let me ask you the reverse question, because I know a lot of you have meditated. How many of you have not meditated before? Any hands up? A lot of people have their videos off. Okay. Okay, Ankur, you haven't. All right, so this
only
is
on Headspace.
that's fine.
Wow.
That's really good that you meditated on Headspace. Cool. So this is going to be like a guided meditation. I'll give you some instructions, and we'll get an opportunity to. Actually, we'll just do just a regular guided meditation. I don't want to talk about any sort of self-inquiry just yet. We only did 2 verses today. So let's sit in a comfortable position, and if you can, close your eyes and just notice that your head, neck, and back are aligned in a straight line. And if it's not, maybe just rock a little forward or backward, just so that you feel comfortable and your head feels nicely balanced and rested. And let's start by taking a few deep breaths. And see that when you exhale, you just relax your body. We'll take another deep breath. And when you exhale, relax your body even more. What we're going to practice today is what is known as the Sakshi Bhav meditation, which literally translates to the attitude of a witness meditation. So we're going to take the position of just being a witness to whatever is coming up in our experience. If there's any sounds around you that you can hear, if there's any sensations that you can feel, if you can feel the sensations of the chair on your back or on your legs, feel the sensation of your clothes on your body. You're going to notice that there are things in your awareness. They appear out of nowhere, and then they change, they exist for a while, and then sometimes they disappear. I like to think of this meditation as just sitting on a bank of a river and just watching the river flow. And in the river, there's a bunch of things that you can see or hear or feel, and you're just watching. You're acknowledging whatever is coming up, but you're not getting involved. So if you're thinking about how hungry you are and what you want to eat, you just want to acknowledge that you're hungry, but don't start thinking about what you're going to cook after this. So you just watch that thought flow by in that river. If you notice that you're lost in that theme of thinking, which basically means that you've jumped into that river, I would want you to come back to the bank and sit down again and just look at the water again. You want to just observe the kinds of thoughts you're having. And just maybe one good practice when you're doing this meditation is just naming things as they come up. So if it's a memory that makes you happy, you can name it as happy. If it's something that makes you sad, you can say sad. So just naming that emotion creates this gap that causes you to come back to the bank and not just jump into the water. We want to start getting familiar with our mind and the kinds of thoughts that we continuously have, especially recurring things. We want to just note them, not go into causation hunting. You don't want to know why we're getting those thoughts, but just know what's going on. So taking this attitude of a witness, you want to see if you can notice where a thought begins and when it ends, and when a new thought begins. Start to notice if you can see the entire length of a thought from start to finish. If you can't, that's totally fine too. But you'll start to notice that just like certain sensations in your body arise, exist for a while, and are gone, that same quality exists in thoughts as well. Thoughts arise, they exist, and then they're gone. And then a new thought arises. But the old thought is gone. So we want to start getting familiar with this process. Another good practice is to put our attention on our breath. If you notice that your mind is just too active, putting our attention on something physical, like the breath, which is always with us, brings us back to the present moment. It's a good practice. And it feels good to breathe consciously as well. If you notice that you've been lost in thought, just bring your attention back to the breath if you can. The process of this meditation is to stay as alert as possible. And if you notice that you're falling asleep, maybe opening your eyes would be a better option. But we want to stay as conscious and alert as possible. And whenever you notice that you're not lost in thought, just bring your attention gently back by either naming the thought or bringing your attention back to the breath. So what we're doing is we're retraining the mind. The natural tendency is to roll the story of past memories, planning for the future. Instead, we want to just watch. We're watching our own movies, but we're not adding to the movie. We are not getting involved. Just watching the river flow by. Let's slowly bring our attention back to objective reality. Whenever you're comfortable, start by gently opening your eyes. So I want to end this meditation with one chant, which is usually tradition in this work to start with a chant and also end with a chant. So I've chosen like an easy one, which I think it's really cool and is very apt for the period that we are all in. Let me share my screen. Okay. All right. Can everyone see this? Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna, so the style of it is what is known as, I guess, I don't exactly know the technical term, but it's like a bhajan, which means to like repeat. So I'm gonna repeat the first line, and then you can repeat the first line, and then I'll say the second line, and then you repeat the second line. And then once you get the tune, we will do this again once more. All right, let me try. Apologies for my voice. It's not the most soothing. Yogarato va bhogarato va. Yogarato va bhogarato va. Sangarato va sangavihina. Sangarato va sangavihina. Yasya brahmani ramate chitta. Yasya brahmani ramate chitta. Nandati nandati nandatyeva. Nandati nandati nandatyeva. So let's try singing this together. Yogarato va bhogarato va. Yogarato va bhogarato va. Sangarato va sangavihina. Sangarato va sangavihina. Yasya brahmani ramate chitta. Yasya brahmani ramate chitta. Nandati nandati nandatyeva. Nandati nandati nandatyeva. Nandati nandati nandatyeva. So this is what the verse means, and so let one revel in yoga, or let one revel in bhoga, which means consumption and the way most people live their lives. Let one seek enjoyment in company or in solitude. She whose mind revels in the self, she enjoys indeed. Only she enjoys. So that's it. Sorry, I ran 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Puneet.
So let's, whoever found this useful, I'm going to do this again next week. I was supposed to do 8 verses today, but I guess that did not happen. So we'll try to do a lot more next time. But thank you so much for joining. I can't believe that this is happening. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Puneet.
It was really cool.
Thank you, Puneet.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, everyone.
This process.
Thank you, Puneet.
Thank you.
Much.
Thank you, Puneet.
Thank you so much, Puneet.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was lovely, Puneet.
Bye, Victoria.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Puneet. This was really insightful.
Glad you enjoyed it.
See you next week.
Thanks a lot.
See you
all
week.
next week.
Thank you, Puneet. Thank you, Puneet. See you next week.
Bye. If anyone has any questions or anything, you can either reach out to me on email or WhatsApp. Happy to do that too. Or if you want to talk about anything else, that's fine too.